Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and along with my wonderful co hosts, we love to review films, either current or classic, on this show. And this week, we're bringing you not one, not two, but three current films. We're going to be discussing Dune, Eternals, and Last Night in Soho. There's so freaking much to talk about. That's what happens when we take a couple of weeks off. We were on vacation. Will's about to go on vacation. You're lucky we've got a show this week. The timing just worked out with our trips. But let me introduce my wonderful co-host so we can jump into our conversation. Jim Pugliafico is with us here in the virtual studio. Hey, sweetheart, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm here. Boy, I'm excited to talk about all three of these movies. And I apologize. My image is zoomed out and I can't figure out how to zoom it back in. My head is just half the size of either Brad's or Will's, but yeah, so this is what you get. You kind of get like mini Jim today.
Don't worry, we're not size queens.
Right?
Speak for yourself. Just kidding. Jim, don't worry about it because we get to see more of your office and your amazing Godzilla decor behind you. So
I hope you like it.
You know, silver linings, right? You've heard from him already, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the wonderful Will Lindis is in the house as well. Welcome, Will. How are you?
Hey, Brad. Hey, Jim. Hey, people that are tuning in live and people that are listening to this later. Yeah, holy crap. Three different movies. We've got a ton to talk about, but gosh, I also want to talk very quickly about Godzilla since, Jim, you just mentioned it. Gosh, I wish you were right here, right now in Texas.
I know what you're going to say, and I'm already a little ticked off about it, but go ahead.
The Alamo Draft House, like a celebration of Godzilla's birthday, and all of the different screenings. Yeah, I'm going to be seeing Shin Godzilla this week before my vacation. So I was like, gosh, I wish Jim was here.
I got all excited because I saw, oh my God, they're releasing a 4K remaster of the original Godzilla film. And it's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see it. How can I see it? Oh, I got to go to the Alamo Draft House.
So world premiere of the 4K.
For now, I got to wait. I'm sure it'll get released. Yeah.
But hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah. Well, my goodness, it's too bad we're missing that babe. But hopefully, we'll get to see it at some point. We've got some folks in the live chat with us already who want to say hi. Our good old friend Hammy says howdy. Hey, Hamstruck, good to see you. Welcome. Tony Gilkinson is also here. He says hello, guys, with a little heart symbol. Tony, always a pleasure to see you, friend. Welcome. And Bobby Miller. Hey, Bobby. Good to see you. He says, hey, guys. We took a little bit of a break. Jim and I went on vacation for a couple weeks. It's good to be back from vacation, although we had to kind of like hurry up and see some movies so we could talk about them. But it's been a hot minute since we've been able to sit down with folks in the live chat. It looks like a bunch of people have joined on. That's so great to see. As we talk about our three films for this week, we're going to spoil them right out of the gate. So if you haven't seen Dune, Eternals, or Last Night in Soho, keep that in mind. We'll introduce each segment so you can kind of manage things as needed. But we'd really love to hear your thoughts about these films as we talk about them. So as we get to each of our different film segments, if you're with us in the live chat, please let us know what you thought. But what if, you might ask, I'm not in the live chat? What if I'm listening on digital tape delay? How do I join the discussion? Guys, how can people be part of our discussion even if they're not on the live show? What can they do?
There's a few different things that you can do even if you're not on the live show. If you want to be a part of the discussion about these movies, we're on several of the different social platforms, right? So you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter, you can find and leave a comment there after the fact. You can also, and this is something that we should probably encourage people to do more and earlier in the episode. So Brad, thank you for doing this. swing by iTunes, swing by wherever you get your podcasts from, and leave a review and say, "Oh my gosh, you guys were so right about Dune," or "Oh my God, guys, you got the Eternals so wrong."
What the hell is wrong with you guys?
Whatever it happens to be. Like, these are discussions that exist. We're having it in real time, but because of the internet working the way it does, it's this out of sync conversation that happens where you can interact with us now. You can interact with us on episodes from a month ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. You can do all of that. So I encourage you to, like, if you're listening to this later, let us know your thoughts.
Indeed. Thank you for that, guys. Speaking of 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we're coming up on December pretty quick, and you know what that means?
Another anniversary.
No, we just celebrated it, right? Like, it can't just be me that's like, we just did our December anniversary episode. The next December anniversary episode is like a ways away, right? Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah, we're talking like 6 weeks from now. I mean, it's coming pretty quick. So
holidays,
it's crazy. I know. Don't even get me started on the holidays being so close. They're almost at hand. But hey, I know what can distract us from thinking about the holidays being right around the corner. How about talking about 3 movies? Are you guys ready?
Yeah. Brad, you had said that like we had to kind of scramble to catch up on these movies, and actually only 2 of the 3 we had to scramble on. One of them we saw before going on vacation, so it's been about 2 weeks since we saw that one. My fear with that one is that we're going to remember enough to talk about on that movie, but I'm sure there'll be enough.
Let the reviews flow.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's enough memorable stuff in that movie too.
Oh, totally. We got this. I think we're up to the challenge. So that said, we're going to talk about Dune first in our movie segments for this week. If you haven't yet seen Dune, we are going to be spoiling it. So you may want to step aside for the next 20 minutes. Come on back for our discussion of Eternals and Last Night in Soho. But just bear in mind, spoilers are going to be officially fair game right from the get-go. I say that now so you don't hang around for the segment and then accidentally get spoiled. That's how much I love you. My love and adoration for all of you comes out in my spoiler warnings. But all of that said, here we go. Our spoiler-filled review of Dune.
I can't not hear the music from the trailer and think about what is it? Immigrant Song. Like so
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe if that's just me, but like I always want the song to keep going in the trailer when they do that little and I'm excited because we probably just heard it in the stinger too.
We probably did. We probably did. So I'm sure that will line up. Jim, just make sure to use that one when you
Okay, all right. I will
add your audio drum.
I'll look for that. I'll look for that one.
So Dune came out, as Jim mentioned. We saw this a couple weeks ago. It's been out for a hot minute already, but I think a lot of people, just judging by Facebook and Twitter, not everybody rushed out and saw this. A lot of people waited to see kind of what the reviews were like that were coming in, and as their friends were saying, "Oh my gosh, you got to go see this." I think a lot of people have been going out. I'm still seeing people in my social media thread feeds even today. I saw someone was seeing Dune as a matinee, which I think is great. Yeah. My question for you guys is, even though it's been a hot minute since we saw this, we knew we were going to catch up with it eventually. What did you think? Was this a pretty good film for you guys? Where'd you come down?
I mean, I had just seen the 1984 Dune, actually, like the day before we went to see this Dune. I hadn't seen the David Lynch 1984 version previously, starring Kyle MacLachlan and Sting and a bunch of other people in there. But this one, that one I found, the 1984 one I found was a really, really interesting, not in a good way all the time for me. And I don't know if it's because I don't have the nostalgia factor in kind of latching on to that movie back when it came out. and developing a love from it from then. But it just seemed kind of odd. This one, I was a little trepidatious going in because of the 1984 movie, but Denis Villeneuve, who, so many great films he's directed, Incendie, Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, and the one that's probably closest to this in terms of its pedigree would be like Blade Runner 2049, kind of. It's kind of in that. It's kind of a sequel or a follow-on to a previously successful film, but done in his own style, and he seems to take a really hardcore sci-fi adventure look at this versus, kind of the David. I really like this one. There's a lot to like about this world that he builds. And yes, does it feel familiar? Star Wars, yeah, it does a little bit. It feels familiar to those of us that have become steeped in like Star Wars lore and stuff like that, in terms of how it feels and kind of the politics at play, interplanetary politics and that kind of stuff. But that's the story, and I love the way he brought it to the screen. Everything looked fantastic. I mean, we saw this in the theater. Wasn't official IMAX, but it was one of the huge DFX screens that we have here, and it.
Oh, and what's your name for those? Because I love it.
It's DFX.
Oh, I thought it was Limax.
No. Oh, that's what we call. That's our generic term for fake IMAX. Is Limax. Yeah, this is our Limax. We have two chains here. One is Galaxy, which is a smaller chain that has a DFX, and then we have Cinemark, which has, what do they call it, babe? What is theirs?
D-Box?
XD.
Extra D. And it's
they both have a giant D in the title, so I'm all about it.
Both have a giant D, right?
Wait. Hold up. Which theater is this, and how can I find them?
Cinemarks, they're everywhere. I don't know if they have them in Texas, to be honest.
Oh yeah, there used to be before I moved to the opposite side of town. We used to have the Cinemark was our closest theater. Now it's an AMC.
Oh boy! All right. Well, yeah. This film looked fantastic, sounded amazing, and I thought the story was, familiar, not because of the 1984 version of Dune or the novel, but familiar in a way like, okay, we've seen this type of story before, but there's something special about this film. I don't know. I'm going to let you guys talk about it. I really dug it. I liked pretty much everything about it. I thought the acting was good. Timothée Chalamet is probably the main lead in this, and does a really great job, I thought. And that was a worry of mine going in. We had seen Timothée Chalamet before and stuff, but we weren't sure, like, could he carry the weight of, a film like this, something on a grand scale. And I think he does. So yeah, I really enjoyed Dune.
Cool. And I think for me, first of all, I came into this with a couple of weird set of biases happening at the same time. One, I haven't seen the original Dune, nor have I read it. So my experience with Dune was pretty much like, yeah, I know Kyle MacLachlan was in it. I know the sandworms. I know the spice must flow. Like, the stuff that bleeds into pop culture. But it's been sort of a blind spot for me. And I debated how much I wanted to sort of track down and read versus see these movies beforehand. And I decided for this one, I wanted to go in incredibly cold and just sort of see if I can experience this without having the context clues and understand it. And I did. And again, I'll preface it to say they may have completely warped and twisted so many different things into something unshapable and unrecognizable. And I only recognize and understand and relate to this warped version of it. That's probably super valid. And there's probably someone in the comments right now saying, yeah, but they left out.
Oh,
I don't know. Dune's version of Tom Bombadil. I don't fucking know. They left someone out of this. She probably did, but I like the version that I saw with the context that I have. Part of that is because Denis Villeneuve he's the guy right now when every so often, especially around Christmas, I know this is a thing that's happening right now, Scott will start asking me questions about like, hey, who's your favorite director? Usually because he's planning something in terms of like some sort of gift. And Denis Villeneuve is always the person that comes to the top of my list first. He's always the first person I mention. He's my favorite modern director because every film that he makes is one of the best films of the year that comes out, bar none, entire catalog. I think there is nobody who is as good, and this is going to be a fucking weird statement. I don't think there's anyone as good at shooting the color orange on screen as Villeneuve, which, I mean, it's obviously kind of a little bit of a joke because
he likes it.
But you think about like Sicario has those hues to it. Enemy. Is sort of like a mustard brown, mustard yellow kind of color. Fucking Blade Runner 2049 out there in the sand dunes as well. So much of it. I love the performances here. I thought they were, they weren't necessarily like acting, but they were good. They carried sort of like the sci-fi elements that I needed. The movie looked really cool. I liked that the story had the wherewithal to sort of pace itself in certain ways. Like, for as important a character as Zendaya is going to be to this story, probably, and as important she is through the flashbacks, we don't actually get to see Zendaya's character in real time. We only get to see sort of like glimpses of the future until the last, 20 minutes of the movie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm excited for this one. This is one that's very fresh in my mind. I didn't see it early on. I watched it last night and today. That was sort of me. Like it's oddly enough, like I think it's the furthest back for the two of you. It's the freshest for me. And you're right about this slow rollout that it's been getting. We're very fortunate. We have this a true IMAX at our Natural History Museum, and they also play certain big movies, and it's one of 12 like real IMAXs in the entire world, 8 of which are in the United States and like 4 in Europe, that is getting this movie in like real IMAX in like December. So we bought tickets for December 3rd. We're gonna go see this a second time in the True IMAX True IMAX, and I'm happy to do so because this movie looks so beautiful just on my living room television that I can't wait to see it just spread out across my entire field of vision. Yeah, this is a recommend for me. Will it be one of my favorite films by the end of this year? I don't know. I mean, Villeneuve movies tend to fill that role. But I've seen stronger films overall this year, but fuck, this is a good one. I recommend it.
Yeah, you got to remember, I mean, he's somewhat obviously beholden to the material, right? I mean, so when you decide to do Dune, a lot of that baggage comes with it, right? And that baggage might be whatever the story is, although he did do some things with the story much different than the 1984 version, which were I consider improvements. I don't know if there's anything that I would consider that detracts from this film, but I'd like to hear from people who do know both and maybe have more of a love for the 1984 one to kind of hear from them, like what they wish Denis Villeneuve had incorporated into this one. But Brad, what did you think?
Brad.
Yeah, I liked this movie a lot. I grew up with the original Dune. It came out in 84. So I remember seeing it when I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5. And then we had it on a VHS tape that, it was recorded on. And my dad would invariably put it on weekends sometimes. And sometimes we'd get like Dune and Return of the Jedi. Like we'd watch them back to back. Return of the Jedi was always the better film for me. But I'm a Star Wars kid at heart. I don't think, though, even growing up with Dune as I did, that it holds the nostalgia place in my heart that it does for a lot of people. I always saw it as sort of a generic Star Wars ripoff. And I don't know. I think as a kid, the voiceover thing threw me off a lot. Like the 84 movie just has so much voiceover. It's hard to tell sometimes like who's talking, what's actually happening, Maybe that's just a kid brain thing or a me thing. So one of the things that I was actually a little concerned about coming into this movie was the level of voiceover work that was going to be happening. Because I was like, oh man, are we going down this road again? And then in the opening moments of the film, what do we hear? a fucking voiceover giving us exposition. And I'm just like, oh no, it's happening again. Don't do this to me. But that was the last time we had a voiceover. Thank goodness. So maybe it was an homage to the first film. I don't know. But I was so glad that they ditched that and really just dug their heels in with true form storytelling. I think the cast here is fantastic. You guys mentioned already, but Timothée Chalamet, we'd seen him in some other films. I recall him from Call Me By Your Name, which I really liked him in. But I was kind of like, how is he going to do carrying a whole movie as the lead here? But, given the character and I don't know, given what this character goes through, I thought, yeah, he could probably maybe be okay at it. He blew me away beyond my expectations. I think he did fantastic with it. I do think that by and large, it took a lot of the best parts of the 84 movie and turned those into some really cool sequences for this film. The initial encounter with the sandworms, for instance, I thought was super, super cool. I will say, though, and I'll just be honest about this, I have only read about half the book. So I am not an authority when it comes to how faithful or not to the book this new version is. Thankfully, we have somebody that is an authority on the book in the live chat with us, that, of course, being Hammy. And Hammy says, it's a largely faithful adaptation of the book so far. We haven't mentioned this, but Dune is really just Dune Part 1. There's the second part,
that's true,
which just got the green light like a week and a half ago that's coming. He says the stuff they left out of the first half of the book will likely be further explained in the next movie when spoilers become revealed. And I think having seen the first movie, we probably could talk about what we think about some of those things are, but I actually worry about doing that because it might spoil people who don't want to see the first movie and want to enjoy the second movie all on its own. So that's a weird line. I don't know how we want to walk it. I don't know if we want to speculate. I'm going to veer away from it personally. But I do think it's cool that, it took a lot of the best stuff from the book, it sounds like, and brought that to life on the screen. I know other friends who have read the book have had a similar reaction. Boy, you are just cat central tonight, babe.
I am.
Well, so the cats can sense the vibrations from Jim's mic.
Is that what it
they're
is?
being drawn towards them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had another.
I need to place a couple of thumpers in other parts of the room.
There.
So they
go there instead. We had another comment in the live chat. Tony Gilkinson says that he went in pretty much with a fresh view. It had been a while since he had seen Dune all the way back in '84. He said he absolutely loved the movie. It was beautiful to look at, and he loved the slow burn where others may not. That's my question for you guys. And Tony, feel free to reply to this as well. But do you think that the slow burn is a detraction for some people seeing this film?
Maybe.
What do you think he's referring to by slow burn? Do you think the fact that we're spreading out the story over two movies now, so we're only getting like half? Is that kind of what he means? Because the Lynch movie was a little bit longer than this movie, but it had the whole story in it, correct?
Yeah, and also there are moments where this movie breathes, right? Like there are moments where we kind of pause on the character of Paul having these sort of like internal moments where he's picturing kind of like the future or these little visions, and they're not like, I mean, there's definitely some action in this, but there's also these moments where it's just sort of him kind of with his thoughts or the politics playing out. I think that we live in a post-Game of Thrones world where I think that some of the stuff that we might consider sort of the slow burn in this is like the political machinations that I think audiences have become more and more accustomed to over the last decade or so. So I can tell you, for me, I never felt this was not like a whiplashly paced movie, but at the same time, it never felt like they were stalling for time. I always felt like the things that were happening were purposeful and moved things forward. So me personally, I mean, it worked super well. And from what I'm seeing from most people, and most people being obviously a large brush, there's people on all sides of every discussion, but I think this is resonating with people for the most part. Enough so that it got greenlit. the second one got greenlit when they could have easily just like said no.
Well, and that's an interesting point. When we saw this movie, the green light for the sequel had not been given. So we're seeing a part one, and it's like, we don't even know if part two is going to be made. What the fuck? And then, you know, we're in Hawaii, and all of a sudden we see on film Twitter that it has been greenlit. And that was very, very welcome news. But I'm with you, Will. I don't think I've seen anyone say that this movie was like super plotting or super boring. I think certainly there are some slower parts, but I don't know that it gets bogged down in itself for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, there was just so much cool stuff. The only part that maybe dragged a little bit for me was in the in the third act before the end. There's kind of a trudge through the desert, basically, that happens, and there is a kind of a character moment action scene embedded in that, but there's a lot of it just seems like we're getting to the end of the movie and it's still, you know, we're putting in more and more and more. And I don't know, for me personally, it felt a little longish that way. But just so much cool stuff in here. I love the ornithopters. I mean,
yes,
I'm like, that
cool.
was really cool. You mentioned the sandworms earlier. They're, you know, very cool. In this movie, it's a much more Brad, I forget what you called it earlier. You had a term there where it kind of stripped out a lot of the what I'll call over the topness, silliness of the David Lynch version. There's some really goofy stuff. And look, I love David Lynch. A lot of times he puts in goofy stuff. Like if anybody's seen, you know, Twin Peaks, they know that there's goofiness for goofy's sake. There's characters in there like the log lady who carries a log around. I mean, you know, things that are put in the story just kind of to pique your interest and say, why is she doing that? Well, that's very weird. This movie has none of that in it. And I think it works better especially in this kind of sci-fi environment. It doesn't need, there's enough interesting stuff going on in the story. It doesn't need that weird stuff like the guy with pus dripping off his face and, you know, stuff like that.
Especially for the tone of this, like the world of Dune, specifically the planet Arrakis, is unrelenting, right? Like it feels like when they say, "Oh, it's like a death sentence to go out into the desert unless you're prepared." Like I felt that from watching this movie. Like it felt like our equipment's going to get battered by the sand and gets destroyed quickly. Yeah, I believe it. Like
we live in Tucson. We live in Tucson. We know what that's like.
That's what I was thinking the whole time we're watching the Arrakis stuff.
Yeah, so it's hot. You know what I mean? Just stay outside where it's cool when it's really hot. And your shit, if you leave your shit outside in the sun, it's going to get wrecked. I mean,
and make sure to water your fucking palm trees.
Water your palm trees. Make sure you hydrate. And if someone challenges you to a ritualistic duel, kill them and harvest them for water. The things that you learn living in Arizona.
Right. Watch out for the flying bugs with the giant stingers that you have to use your, you know, swiftness to prevent being killed from.
Yeah. Flying scorpions.
Like, there you go. Hey, Kevin Ryan is in the chat.
Hey, Kevin. He had to bolt.
He says, won't be sticking around for the latter movies since I haven't seen him yet, but just wanted to pop in and say hi. Good to see you, Kevin. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure. Well, gentlemen, any other final thoughts on Dune before we shift over to the second movie in our program for this week?
No, it sounds like we're all kind of right in the same line there. And I think, you know, I think this is a quality film. I think fans of sci-fi should seek this one out. I don't think it's on. It is available on streaming right now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's HBO Max.
Like it came out. Yeah,
so I watched it downstairs 2 hours ago.
Yeah, no excuse. Yeah. You know, again, this is one of those movies, though. If you do feel comfortable and you feel that it's safe to do so for you or whoever you're going out with, I think this one is worth seeing in the theater. Biggest screen, best sound system. Definitely do that.
Oh my goodness! I just realized, like, I was like, I was about to make the statement of pretty much anything that has Denis Villeneuve's name attached to it, you can go watch, including his upcoming projects, of course, Dune Part 2. And then after that, it looks as though he's also been attached to Cleopatra. Yes, they are keeping him in they're keeping him in the desert, it looks like, or
more.
They're gonna
don't lose that orange filter, Denis.
Yeah,
you're gonna need it again.
And I'm here for it. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong, but it'll probably be one of my favorite movies the year it comes out. So
yeah,
it just well might. It just well might. Well, thankful that we're getting a Dune Part 2. Stay tuned for
Dune
that
Part 2.
I see what you're doing there.
Hopefully Part 2 will be just as good as Part 1. Well, we're going to go ahead and shift gears and talk about the next film in our cavalcade of film discussions this week. Our next film is going to be Eternals, the new Marvel film. If you have not yet seen Eternals, but you did see Dune and you hung around for this conversation, now is your time to step away for about 20 minutes and then come on back for Last Night in Soho. Of course, assuming you've seen that, we are spoiling all of the movies that we're talking about on this week's episode. But do what you need to do. Spoilers are going to be fair game, so just a heads up. Here we go. Our discussion of Eternals. All right. So, MCU serving us up some eternal realness. It's interesting. A lot of people, we were talking about movies being like slow and boring and plotting, and Dune not being that. A lot of people have been saying that about Eternals. So, Jim, we haven't really talked about the film that much because we tend to save our loads for the podcast. Well, I did not watch your review.
We save our loads for Will.
Will, I saw the review.
That's for the saving the loads for me. That's for our other show. Private links below. Just check our Patreon. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there we go. OnlyFans. Will, I saw that you and Scott had put out a review, but I didn't watch it because I wanted to come in fresh. Did you guys feel like this movie was slow in plotting? I mean, is that something that resonates with you, or what did you think?
You want to go first, Jim?
I'll go first. Absolutely not. I did not think this movie was slow in plotting. I thought this movie was it a different pace than your normal Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, Marvel, whatever action hero movie? Yes. Mainly because I wouldn't talk about Eternals as superheroes per se. Well, I guess they're superheroes, but they're not the caped superheroes that we have kind of come used to. Not only that, but this film is about the kind of the Eternals are a group of immortal beings placed on the planet to kind of keep, let's just say for now, keep humanity going, keep the engine of humanity.
We're all spoilers.
Spoilers are fair game. Spoil that bitch.
So at the beginning, we're like, these are beings that are here to kind of keep humanity relatively safe and viable and functioning. But what we don't know is that that's so it can be destroyed by a giant fucking being to be born and burst out of the planet Earth at the end. So no, I didn't really find this boring. I found it fascinating. I found that idea fascinating and how they kind of flipped it around a little bit at the end. This movie is not perfect for me. I did like it a lot. I love. Let me just say, a lot has been put on the director here, Chloe Zhao. She's an award-winning, Academy Award-winning director now. She directed Nomadland. She's directed The Rider, which is one of my favorite films of all time. Those can be seen maybe as a lot slower films than this one. And maybe that's why people are saying, oh, this film's slow, because Chloe Zhao develops, character-driven pieces. Um, and I might agree with that, but not with this film. I think her sensibilities, she's trying to. It seems like her sensibilities are trying to come through the Marvel machine, right? The Marvel cookie cutter machine. I could have totally seen this movie done by a different director, Patty Jenkins or the whatchamacallit brothers who do some of the other films. But I think what Chloe Zhao brought to this movie were some of the things that I really liked about it, because it made it very un-Marvel like for me in a lot of cases. And to me, that's a plus. I don't want to see another cookie cutter Marvel movie. I'm glad this movie tried to do some things that you probably won't see in a lot of those other films. Character moments, some emotional beats that aren't just, oh, somebody's dying or whatever. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I'm not going to go on too much more about it because I know you guys probably have a lot to say too. So go ahead.
Yeah, I will start by saying, like, huge fan of Chloe Zhao, and coming into this was one of my more anticipated kind of big blockbuster films of the year. Love Chloe Zhao, and she has been riding a wave after her Oscar wins, right? This last year. This film, unfortunately, bears the weight of a lot of what I would consider bad faith criticism that started hitting the reviews cycle before the film was even released. This movie has the audacity to have a multi-ethnic and multiracial cast, as well as at least one prominent queer character in it. Oh. And it received, as these things do, a huge, like, 1-star review bombing a few weeks before the movie even came out. And so the movie had to exist in a realm where both it was trying to be its own thing while also having to counter well, you're just trying to be woke because you had the audacity to put a black person in this movie. I hate that fucking bullshit. And that's my least favorite part of the internet. The fact that racists and homophobes still exist in the droves that they do. Neither here nor there. I mean, I guess it is here. And, but I enjoyed this movie a lot. In fact, I put this pretty high on my overall Marvel list. I came into this not knowing a ton about the Eternals as characters specifically. They're part of Jack Kirby. He was the co-creator with Stan Lee of basically like the Marvel universe as we know it. And one of his fascinations was this concept of the new gods, which we saw over in the DC side of things, and the Eternals over here. This idea of almost like the and you see this a lot of times on the History Channel, like the ancient astronauts theory of people visiting kind of at the beginning of Earth's life cycle and helping to, like, from another planet or from the stars or whatever, and sort of being the shepherds for humanity all the way through. All that to say that we get to see a story here that is very personal and very human, in that it's these characters dealing with these really real revelations about who they are and the way they interact with the world, and also these century spanning almost like an epic telling of the story of this group of people as they work their way through the shadows through all of history. Because of all of that, I think this movie does something. And Brad, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this point. You may not know the character I'm about to mention. I think this movie in some ways solves what some movies kind of dub like the Superman problem better than a lot of other modern Superman movies. Definitely leaving off kind of like the beloved classics from our childhood off of this, but I am definitely including in all of the more recent ones. In that telling a story about someone who is both above humanity in so many ways because of just the things that they shouldn't be able to relate to, but the ways that they are able to integrate with humanity because of the commonalities. And I think that's what I love so much about this movie, just to sort of like narrow it down. I think this movie does that story better than a lot of the most recent, like I've harped on why I don't like Zack Snyder movies for a lot of reasons, but I think a big part of it is I don't think he understands the character of Superman, at least the way that I in the same way that I appreciate the character. And I think this movie, I mean, Chloe Zhao, I would love to see her make a fucking Superman movie now, given all of this. The cast is great. We get to see our first real on-screen queer character in one of these Marvel movies, in the character of Phastos, played by Brian Tyree Henry. And also, isn't it awesome that he's a bigger guy too, right? Like, I can't think of the number of times where I've seen a character that I can relate to, at least on those two checkpoints, in a big budget blockbuster where the sexuality wasn't played for like laughs or jokes. At no point was it a punchline. Everyone was just pretty cool with it, which makes sense for this eon spanning group of friends. Plus, the other kind of like awesome sex symbol character of this was Gilgamesh, played by Ma Dong-seok. And so we have two prominent bigger dudes in this movie, who, again, at no point was their weight ever a joke. At no point do they make any like, you're getting a little round around the middle, Phastos jokes, or Gilgamesh, you're just too busy. Like, I mean, Gilgamesh liked cooking, but also he liked punching things really hard. And that's the when we think about Gilgamesh, we think about how much he punched things and his friendship with the Angelina Jolie character. All that to say, I really liked this movie for a lot of different reasons. It looked good. There were so many just fucking gorgeous like scenes, and that's something Chloe Zhao brings. I thought the action was fun. You know, the action hit the way it was supposed to for these movies. All the characters, I could always keep track of where this huge ass cast was at any given time, what they were doing and why they were doing it and their motivations. And I've seen so many lesser movies lose track of that. Yeah, so this one is a win for me. It's not going to be for everyone. Whatever, that's fine. But, you know, this is my review. And for my review, you know, I'm all about it.
All right. Well, sounds like a lot to like there for both of you. Hammy in the chat says, I haven't seen Eternals. I don't mind spoilers for this, though. But did they play Eternal Flame by the Bangles? Hammy, missed opportunity. Total missed opportunity.
I didn't hear it.
You know what, though? If the director of Suicide Squad made this, they 100% would have, right?
Probably.
Like David Ayers. I think David Ayers, yeah, one.
This one did have a really weird soundtrack, though. Like,
it did.
There were some interesting needle drop choices in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. I want to go back to something that you brought up, Will, the gay kiss that happens in this movie. I'm going to tell you, for like one of the first times ever, I cried in a Marvel movie. And it was that moment. It was that kiss. Not just because of what was going on screen, although that was emotional, but I felt incredibly validated and seen to have a gay kiss like that. Also being from like a chub chaser bear couple, whatever you want to call it. They don't put those labels on it, but we, you know, it's hard for us not to. But it just felt so incredibly validating to see that play out. And I was kind of curious, you know, what Disney would do with this film in other countries where that is not quite so acceptable. I was expecting to go read that they maybe removed that scene so that this movie would play well in places like China and Saudi Arabia. They didn't. They said no, they weren't going to do it. I don't know how much of that was Chloe Zhao. I don't know how much of that was Disney. It was probably both of them, I hope. But I think that's amazing. And the movie has now been banned in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and some other places that, you know, obviously this would not play as well. And I just think it's so incredible that this film gets to be itself and do its thing, even though it's not going to play now in some of these places where it's banned. I think that's fantastic. So as much as we like to bash on Disney sometimes owning everything and, you know, all that goes with Disney, how much they charge for the parks, Will, you know, you're about to go to Disney. I have to support them and very, very much appreciate them for this moment in this film. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just the way it was portrayed. I mean, it was portrayed like it is, just like any other type of relationship. Here we have a gay, multiracial relationship and a family, right? They had a young child that they were raising too. And I'm appreciative that they showed that here are two, here's a gay couple who's raising a child in the normal way that all parents raise children, right? They spend time with them when they can, and they teach them the way, and they miss them when they're away. It's just this movie did a lot in that regard in terms of representation, and not just gay couples, but there was a lot of great representation going on in here. There was a Bollywood scene in this movie, okay, which was kind of weird. Like, I'm like, okay, it wasn't just like, oh, we'll do a quick cut to this guy doing his Bollywood scene, and then it's like cut, and he comes back as the Eternals guy. They actually had like almost a full Bollywood number in the middle of this movie, which I think that takes balls to do that, and I give them credit for that. I kind of like some Bollywood stuff anyway, so that was cool. I'm not, I haven't been the biggest Kumail Nanjiani fan up to now. We've seen him in some stuff, and normally, obviously, he's a comedian. He's an actor comedian now. Yeah. But he came out of the comedy world, and for the most part, I thought the comedy that he put in to this did land. I don't think they let it go too far. I thought the assistant guy that he had.
I loved him.
I forget the character's name.
Karun.
I thought that played really well because he was kind of like the everyman. He was an audience surrogate, kind of inside the machinery of the Eternals, or at least this one Eternals guy. And I thought that was great. A good move putting that character in. So there's a lot to like here. There's just a lot.
There really was. I think that with movies like this, I think you need some levity, right? Like, I think you need some moments where there's laughter, there's joy, there's love, there's whatever, like the thing. Because if this is a story about human, like whether or not you're an actual human being or you're an Eternal, this is a story about what it is to be human, what it is to fight for humanity. Then you need those moments, and being able to see, like Tony calls out in the comment, like Gilgamesh's like need to protect Athena. When you get to see Fastos and Ben, and just how much they both love one another and they love their child, and they have to grapple with all of that. When you see Kumail Nanjiani, he's the comedic, he's the slapstick character, so to speak, in this movie. But his stuff is grounded in something that's really real. This is a character who enjoyed the stories that Sprite told so many times when they were kind of going through the years. And once he no longer had access to Sprite, he wanted to sort of step into a role where he can start telling those stories as well. He's a bit ego-driven, and he has to debate kind of like, well, do I want to be like a protector of this world, or do I want to be someone who profits from this world? And I love that, because that's also a superhuman and realistic thing for a character to go through. So yeah, even though his character was there for laughs, his character was also there to show how all of the different characters had to grapple with their humanity in very, very, very different and unique ways.
Yeah.
And we didn't mention Gemma Chan as Cersei, who I think, she has to play sort of like the most kind of like the middle of the road character, because so she doesn't get as much character eccentricity. But I think I loved her being like, she was the main character of this movie. She was the if you were to say who was the one sole lead of this movie, it's Cersei. She's the one who was in the protagonist role, who every major moment of revelation or conflict or resolution is filtered through either her presence or her absence from a scene that she's soon going to be in. And so I love that. They could have, and granted, it's because she and the Black Knight, who we also got to see in Kit Harington, kind of were the two biggest characters from the comic books. They were actually both Avengers for a bit, where the other characters were all like, just sort of more on the side in Eternal stuff. Actually, Gilgamesh, I think, was an Avenger too. But still, I loved seeing that. I loved seeing Cersei in that central role here. I loved that.
So we had both dudes from Game of Thrones and a character named Cersei.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, we totally did.
Yeah, and I'm watching that, and I'm like, oh, this is like Game of Thrones in space or whatever, you know. So
and specifically, the two characters from Game of Thrones were both Starks, and they were the ones that were in the love triangle with Cersei. So it's very linked, right?
it's sort of like it's almost like uncannily linked. It's just kind of weird. I don't think it was intentional, because obviously we have character names that are kind of set in stone. There are a couple knocks on this movie from my perspective. One, there's a character here that I don't know if they didn't flesh this character out very well, or it just didn't resonate with me like on a personal level, and that was a sprite character. I just had some issues with the way they played that character, especially toward the end, and also the stingers. I don't think unless you're steeped in Eternals lore and the canon, I don't think you're going to understand either of those stingers.
Oh, I'll be honest. I was clueless about both of them.
I mean, Patton Oswalt dwarf shows up with some other dude holding an orb, and I'm like, oh, I recognize the orb. I recognize the orb. Huh?
Yeah, so let's hang out for a couple minutes afterwards, because I think like for me to explain those would 100% eat into our time. But it sets up stuff for future,
and that's
movies,
what these Marvel stingers do. I wish they had done something different, but they never will, because that's their marketing strategy. And
And I'll say I still like it though, because I think that one of the knocks that we sometimes give against these movies is that they do too much of their they're too much of advertisements for other movies. But I think if you're doing that all like kind of like in the credits or post credits, then it's sort of like it doesn't take away from the actual like narrative structure, right? So like if those scenes had happened inside of the movie, then I would have been like, whoa, what the fuck? Like, that's like some weird whiplash. But afterwards, it's just sort of Easter eggy stuff. Like, this movie only really connected to the core movies in general, just when it talks about Thanos' snap and how it reduced the percentage, which was important to know, because this movie was all about how there's been like a meter of how many people are on this planet before like this event triggers. And when Thanos did his little snap, it kind of reset that for 5 years. I thought that was an interesting way to sort of bring that in without it being like you have to know all this shit. You just have to know kind of like that. And you know that if you just exist in the world and, understand pop culture.
So here's the thing, Will, though. I watched this movie and I kept thinking to myself, especially toward the end, I'm like, this movie would have been like a grand slam for me if it was not a Marvel property. Like if this was like just Chloe Zhao going off with some writer coming up with this story about these beings that like, these kind of ethereal, immortal beings that kind of are trying to guide humanity. I think this movie could have been, obviously it's a different movie. I get it. It's not the movie we got, but I praise this movie because it's different than most Marvel movies. But I think if it was even more different, it would have been amazing.
And I will say one thing I think that helps contextualize all of that too is like the flip side of that, I would say, is true too. Like, we exist in a world where these Marvel movies are going to happen. So instead of like segmenting kind of like Eternals off to its own story, I love that it exists within this stream, because it tells me that with what's happening on the television shows and with this, that Marvel is playing around a little bit with their own edges, and that's important, for the big blockbuster franchise, for them to play around in with their own formula a bit. I'm here for it. So
did you say they're playing around with edging?
They a couple of the characters are
definitely
yeah.
Oh boy. Well, I think there's a lot more we could probably talk about with this film. We didn't even talk about Thena and her Alzheimer's, but I don't know. There's like a thousand other things we could discuss, but we still have a whole nother movie to talk about. So we probably should make that switch over. But I feel lucky to live in a world where Eternals exists. And again, we got that amazing moment of representation in a movie that wasn't afraid to take some risks. So, Will, hey, Will. He says, every movie going forward is going to have to subtly mention the fact that there's a giant hand sticking out of the Atlantic now.
You know what's interesting is if I think at this point the human beings that live in the Marvel universe, there's been so much wild shit that's happened that it's almost like there's been no wild shit that happened. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You know, like when the alien invasion of New York was the only thing, that's all they talked about. But now it's just like, oh my God, like there's like a fire monster attacking the city. Must be a Tuesday.
Right. Oh, man. All right. Well, guys, let's go ahead and switch things up. We're going to talk about Last Night in Soho. Of course, just like we have with the last couple of movies, we're coming in hot with spoilers for Last Night in Soho. So if you have not yet seen Last Night in Soho, I'm going to say the film title like 3 more times. This is your opportunity. Go ahead, step away. I'd say come on back, but this is the last movie we're going to talk about. And we're not doing plugs this week because we're essentially plugging 3 movies. So feel free to step away. We will see you for what we're going to do next time. But Jim, Will, here we go. Our discussion of Last Night in Soho. All right, so there's a lot going for this movie. We got Anya Taylor-Joy. We got go-go dancing. We got Diana Rigg. We got so much. Did this movie fire on all cylinders for you guys?
Let's see. For me, it fired amazingly well on about 3/4 of its cylinders. I loved this movie for the first 2 acts. I thought this was fantastic. So the movie is basically like it's hard to explain, but the main character played by Thomasin McKenzie, who I love, by the way. It's Thomasin McKenzie, right? Is that her name?
Oh,
Thomasin?
Yep.
Yeah. Who I remembered from Leave No Trace, and she's fantastic. She begins, she's going to college for fashion design. She's going to she moves into this apartment, and she starts having these visions, dreams, nightmares, premonitions, whatever you want to call them. But that's the part I loved. I love just the way that Edgar Wright like played with that trope we've seen 100 million times of somebody like having dreams of, is this real? Is this not real? Just some of the visual things that he was able to do with that was great, and how they're building the central story, this mystery of what happened to Sandy or Alexandra or whatever the heck her name was, who was played by Anya Taylor-Joy. Really had me hooked. And I'm like, oh, and then I'm digging like the whole 60s soundtrack. And I'm like, oh, this movie is my jam. This is awesome. And unfortunately, in the last act, I think it kind of falls into very rote horror movie kind of horror movie aesthetic and tropes, and starts to overuse a couple of things that I thought it was pretty effective at early on, unfortunately. And so I still enjoyed the movie a lot for the first 2/3, but like the last third was a little bit of a letdown for me, but not enough to ruin the movie. So I had a great time with it.
Gosh, it's really weird that we picked very specifically these 3 movies for this week, because I ended up with a very similar, like, the things that I liked about all 3 fall into some very specific categories. Like, all 3 of these directors are directors that I absolutely love from previous projects. All of the performances in these movies, I would say, are really good performances, and I think the acting is one of the big benefits. all three are incredibly visual directors who put forward some very, very beautiful looking shots, some very interesting looking shots, things that move the story together while also are visually appealing. This is a visual medium. So I think that's really fucking cool. And we have that here with Last Night in Soho as well. Love Edgar Wright. I love that, you know, we've seen him in his comedy movies and we've started to see him sort of break out of that box a little bit, you know, Baby Driver, then this. Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy are just phenomenal. And the two of them do such good work that I have a problem trying to identify which one I liked better in this. And that's cool. They're both really solid performances. I'm with Jim. I think that I think the first two acts of this movie are damn near pitch perfect. I think the last act, I don't think it completely face plants. I don't think that it completely loses it. But I think that it's less for me that it falls into rote category. I think instead, I think that it's sort of the story that it's trying to tell, it wavers on a couple of things so that it muddles sort of what it's going for. And so by the end of it, you don't get a sense of, sometimes at the end of a good, like a ghost story horror movie, there's like this sense of either like paranormal cosmic justice or this feeling of existential dread or something along those lines, but it sort of bounced between a couple of those things. So at the end, I didn't feel any of those things strongly enough. So again, I think that it needed to just sort of pick a lane and figure out how it wanted to go. And it could have gone either of those lanes super well, but instead it didn't quite. Still liked it. Still really liked it. I still think it's a good movie. It's just this one, there was a point in this movie where I was like, yeah, this fucking thing is definitely on my top 10 list for the year. It's definitely going to do there. I don't think that's going to be the case now. I think that, like, as you know, as it ended and as I sort of get a little bit distance from it, it's like one of those perfectly fine movie that I'm glad I watched, but that I won't necessarily be like championing forever and ever and ever. So that's still good. Still good.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the quote on the movie poster. It's still good.
It's still pretty
It's
good.
still good. It's pretty.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think I come down with you guys on this one. And we've been thinking very similarly on all three of these movies. This is interesting.
And
but
we
I
did not compare notes either. I came into this thinking like,
not at all.
Brad's going to hate Eternals. I think Jim's not going to be in for Last Night. So I totally was like, I'm actually surprised. So cool.
It's kind of fun to take three movies like this and not talk about how we feel. Because even in the car ride home, back from seeing, you know, Eternals and then Last Night in Soho, like we barely talked about the movies. So with a lot of things, even for you, babe, it's the first time I'm hearing your thoughts. But yeah, I'm right there with you both. I think maybe I would say, though, instead of like 2/3 of the movie being really great and then the last third being I'd say it's about half and half for me. I think the first half had some really great buildup, but I think it gets really bogged down in how many times we have to see the main character running from the faceless Johns. Like, we get it. We get it. Like, there's all these people that have died or whatever, or, you know, come after her and abuse her and, you know, and like, those are serious things. And yes, we get the trauma, but I just felt like if we'd had one more fucking sequence of like them reaching out for her and trying to get her, I was just going to be over it. And then what did we get? One more fucking sequence of them like reaching out for her. The only thing that redeemed it at the end was that they wanted her help. That was the big twist, because wait for it, it was really the Alexandra character who was the murderess the whole time and not the Matt Smith character. The doctor's hands are free of blood. It was actually her that was doing all the killing. So I was like, all right, whatever, I'll accept that. But as much as I love Diana Rigg, and rest in peace, Diana Rigg. I'm so sad that we lost her September of 2020. But this has got to be one of the last things she did before she died. And she's phenomenal in this. Up to the point of being like the manic killer at the end. It gets a little too like evil grandma-y. And it almost becomes funny watching her like going up the stairs, slashing the knife, when I think I should be feeling suspense and like, oh my God, like what's going to happen? It kind of made me laugh a little bit. And I don't know that that's Diana Rigg's fault, but you know, it just, it took what I think was an otherwise great build-up and made it into something that was a little schlocky.
It did. I mean, this was a movie that, like, it really wanted to tell a ghost story where the true ghosts were the things that we do that haunt us. Like, that's sort of like the story here, you know, like, not the, I mean, obviously, yes, the physical ghosts were the Johns themselves, but I think that the metaphorical ghosts here are just sort of like the weight of the trauma that exists upon us and how that trauma bleeds out and affects the people around us, that sort of thing. My problem with that, though, is that I think it could have been, if I think that whole like Sandy trying to kill her at the end moment, which is sort of short lived, I think kills a little bit of that for me. I think this movie could have been more like tragic if it had just ended with like a conversation or ended something like that.
Yeah.
Or hadn't had like, you know, like, yeah, maybe the guys were like reaching out to her, but there's a moment where like the movie almost feels sympathetic for them as the victims. And I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like that feeling of like, yeah, these shitty guys, like they're not the ones I want to feel sympathetic for. And I don't think that Edgar Wright wasn't sitting down saying like, I want to make a movie where it's the evil process. That is not, he was not doing like intentionally. This was not him being a shitty person and like trying to tell a shitty story with it. This was just him, I think, wanting to amp up sort of like the energy of the climax, and as a result, sort of like muting what I think was the true energy being built up until then.
Yeah, I think Hammy hits on something here that is kind of what we're talking about, saying the ending was sad. We see Sandy giving up as she has become completely broken from the decades of abuse by these men, and by her dreams being dashed by, instead of being drawn into a world of, you know, fame and entertainment, she's drawn into a world of just shitty prostitution. The true horror wasn't so much the ghost, but rather what she had to live with. And I wish we had seen a little bit more of that from Diana Rigg at the end, instead of, oh, now I'm the evil, I'm gonna, you know, I'm just gonna kill everybody now. And yes, obviously that's probably a valid, one of many valid responses we could have got. I just wish we could have seen maybe some of that sadness and regret in the older Sandy. I think it would have been more powerful for me, instead of fucking hands busting up through the floorboards of the house, which I thought was, you know, I that was kind of eye rolly for me a little bit. Yeah. Number one, because we kind of, if we've seen it 100 times, you know, we've seen that 100 times, and it's just not, I don't know. It didn't, especially compared with the just the splashiness of the first two acts of this movie, how great they were. And then putting this third act, it you know, in another movie, this third act probably would have been great, but in this movie, it felt lesser. You know what I mean? And kind of dragged it down for me.
Oh yeah, yeah. Different movies have to have different approaches, and there's no one size fits all. Like, I think about one of my favorite horror movies of recent years, in Hereditary, and you think about the ending of that movie, how it just becomes almost like the aristocrats joke of just like more and more intense random bullshit happening, and it fits because that's what that movie needs to tell that story at that time. That ending would not have fit here. Likewise, I think the ending that we got, specifically the not even the ending, I'm talking about like the climactic elements of the ending. It almost feels like those were sort of like airlifted from like another film and sort of dropped in here. And that's the thing that sort of I took issue with. And again, it's still a good movie. It's just, I really wish this was close to being a great movie to me. And that's always more frustrating in some ways. Like, yeah, I've watched a bunch of shitty horror movies and I can sit through them and enjoy them. I did a fucking a movie marathon on Halloween where I got to watch 1982's Boarding House, which is an absolutely terrible movie, but was so much fun to watch. But it's frustrating when a movie like teeters on the edge of greatness and just like misses that one or two elements from getting there. Because again, and also I know Edgar Wright can do it. I know he can do that too.
And I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest like Edgar Wright fan. I like Baby Driver. I'm not a fan of the Cornetto trilogy so much. You know, World's End and, you know, Shaun of the Dead and all, you know, even Scott Pilgrim was not a movie that I actually liked. And I know I can get thrown out of a lot of places for even saying that, but
Hold on,
it's
I'm buffering.
not. So I'm going to say that the first 2/3 of this movie is the best stuff he's ever done. Number one. And, I just like that, we already beat that dead horse, but I really love the first 2/3 of this movie and wished that's going to be my pull quote. Frustratingly good.
Oh, there you go.
Put it on the poster. You know what? One of these days, I'm going to start making the posters that we say, like that we should put that awesome on the poster. We'll have a little gallery of just like, Brad saying, I hated the symmetry in this.
Oh boy,
that's a whole conversation right there. Oh boy. Well, gentlemen, any final thoughts on last night in Soho before we look to wrap this thing up?
I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. I did love the whole like 60s vibe of this, right? The movie's not set in the 60s, don't take me wrong. The movie's set in present day, but the dreams or can't be premonitions. They're postmonitions. I don't know what they are. But those all take place with Sandy.
They're nocturnal postmonitions.
And kind of the fashion, the music was all spot on. And I really appreciated that. That was great.
Yeah, I want a pink muumuu dress now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I want a white patent leather coat.
This was definitely a movie that like looked and felt very, very good. And I think the other thing that I think is important for people to realize is, and I've seen this conversation happening. There's some horror movies that don't play 100% like kind of like what we consider to be like kind of the stereotypical horror movie. The same thing happened when like Crimson Peak came out, and we had to sort of like remind people like it's not a straight up horror movie. It's actually gothic romance. And the same thing with this movie. Like it's is Crimson Peak on the horror shelf? Yeah. Is this movie on the horror shelf? Yeah. But if you're looking for like, ooh, I want something spooky for spooky season, which I know we're past, but still, this movie isn't that. This movie is about trauma and sadness, and that's the true like horror of it. Not like the jump scares and the bloody knives, which there's some of in this, but it's a different animal of movie. So go in with the right expectations, I think.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great thought to leave this conversation on. Jim, Will, it's been great being back in the saddle with you guys. We talked about a lot on this week's episode. 3 whole movies. I can't thank you guys enough for the great conversation that we had. Also want to give a big thank you to everyone who's been hanging out with us in the live chat tonight. There were a lot of comments. We didn't get to read all of them on air, but some really good conversations happening in that chat. Thank you to everybody who tuned in live for our recording, but also thank you to everyone else who accesses the show. 95% of people don't tune in live. And we want to make sure you feel just as appreciated as those folks who do tune in live. Whether you're joining us from your daily commute, maybe you're on the exercise bike, however you enjoy our show, whenever that is, we appreciate you coming up on whatever the fuck anniversary it's going to be in just, 6 weeks. We really, 9? Is it 9? Holy crap.
I think it's
8 or 9.
That means, 2012. So it's got to be 9.
13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, 9.
9. Wow. That means we're coming up on a decade of MBP in like a little over a year. Okay, that just made me feel really
well, we call
old
it MBP 10 or MBP X,
Well, we've got a little over a year to figure out how we're going to market that. Maybe that'll go on the next round of t-shirts we make. But Hammy says, so happy to see you live again. Hammy, great to see you and everybody else who joined us and will join us. Definitely appreciate all of you tuning in week after week. Thanks for supporting the show. Love and adore you all, and we will see you next time. Before we go, though, real quick, in case folks want to continue the conversation, Jim, where can people interact with you online?
I'm on Twitter at JJPOutWest. That's where you can check out some of my tweets or even get a hold of me there, DM me or whatever, talk about movies or anything else that I tweet about. And you can also find me on Facebook at my name, Jim Pugliafico. It's right here.
All right. Excellent. Will, how about you?
All right, got a few. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I don't talk about my Instagram enough, so find me on Twitter and Instagram at whatever. You can find me on Facebook. Just
TikTok, Will, is where it is. TikTok.
Send me a message. Actually, we'll get to that. Letterboxd, just search for William Lindis there and give me a follow. I'll follow you back. It's where I do movie reviews. And yeah, I've been TikToking like crazy lately. I am now officially an old on TikTok, so actually look for, and I was able to claim this one, so I jumped on it. Look for at the movie bear on TikTok.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, that one was available. I was just like, yeah, okay, that's me now.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, look for me on TikTok. I'm mostly shirtless and dancing on there. So if that's your thing, come find me.
They don't make you put old in your tag, like the old movie bear. They don't do that.
Look, they don't have to put that, because anyone with eyes can see that I am.
On TikTok, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, folks. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for Brad Harris. I'm the one who is bearded and chubby, as opposed to the 4 other Brad Harrises who are skinny and I think Republican, based on what I can tell from their photos. That ain't me. You can also find me on Letterboxd at iBradPro, as well as on Twitter at iBradPro. We'll see you all next time. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.